The Lunar Guardsman. Written by Crimmar. Chapter 1. Prologue. Twilight focused on the apple before her, took note of every single detail, every scratch and imperfection on its skin. Her eyes traveled over the clipped stem, stalling as she memorized the direction and curvature, and let her sight rest over the single tiny green leaf curling on top of it. She stood completely still, and only part of her given to motion were her eyes, the irises moving erratically as they zeroed in on each tiny dimple and discoloration. Twilight's horn lit as she picked up the object of her scrutiny in her manipulation of the magic field, and gently, oh so gently, and carefully, rotated the apple 1/8 of its diameter to the left before restarting the whole process. The operation proceeded smoothly. It was slow going, sure, and she would have to repeat it twice over, so she could entrench her memory to the bottom and top of the apple from their perspective views. Success hinged on the meticulous of her actions, and Twilight Sparkle, personal student of Princess Celestia and protege extraordinaire, would not be found wanting. At least not for the 18th time in a row. She shook her head, the smallest shudder possible so as not to dislodge or blur her vision, and removed these petty distractions from her mind. Magic was calling. Success was calling. After a great unknown number of minutes, time spent being one of the more unimportant aspects of her venture, she felt ready. The red shiny apple now existed in two places at once. One was right in front of her, the other rested in her mind's eye, ready to be manipulated, and mirror its changes to its material brother. She closed her eyes, everything she needed laid right in her perfect memory. She channeled her magic in her horn, slowly and subtly bringing change to the magic field that clung on the seemingly spotless flesh of the fruit before her. Spotless. She scoffed. She knew every weakness and sore that lay on the apple, and now she would take away the one that dared affront her so. Her spell ended. This was it. The fruit of her labors, in the most literal way, was right in front of her. She opened her eyes slowly, exulting in the approaching view of her triumph. The apple was orange. It wasn't red anymore. It was orange. Orange as in orange, the color that isn't yellow. The color that the apple hadn't changed due to her failure. Again. 18 failures in a row. The young filly picked up the apple in her hoof, and with a bellying cry of rage, not a high-pitched scream, the distinction was important, chucked the Celestia damned apple to the furthest reaches of the Canterlot Royal Library. The 11-year-old unicorn took some satisfaction in that throw. She made it as far as 6 reading tables away. That was a new record, at least. Well, that one in the 18th She would not think about that. She pouted and looked down at her book. The Illustrated Illusion Destruction Itinerary by Pipe Dream. The theory section had been practically inhaled, and the book was open on the practical exercise section, page 2. She looked around. The library expanded over most of the whole wing of the castle, the rest of it shared by the royal archives and some rooms and offices for their attendants. The shelves were stacked high, up to 5 times a pony's height, with small rolling ladders positioned intermittently around. The library space was separated into smaller wings, each wing containing a category or subcategory of a subject on their own, with small walled spaces that formed reading sections for ponies to bring their books and read in silence. Each reading room, she knew, was enchanted with a sound dampening spell that kept noises down, both those that came from outside the room, but also from outside the inside. Having heard and caused the deafening, echoing explosion of sound that came from the fall of a book from its shelf to the stone floor, she understood why. Giant rooms with hard surfaces turned themselves into acoustic chambers that could bombard some pony's nerves every time any pony just walked around. She was in such a reading room right now. No pony else was around, but a small miracle of itself in this room, being the closest one to the entrance, was usually the first in line for any pony to put to use. But for hours now it had been her sole domain. Well, not just hers. She did have some company with her, which explained why they were left in peace for so long. The apple, now sporting exciting new bruises, was placed in front of her again. She looked up and saw the tall, bipedal form of her bodyguard, friend, and surrogate father, Titles not ordered by importance, mind you, gently bent over at his midpoint as he rested his hands inside his crew jacket's pockets and used one of his long legs to hook and drag a stool beneath him in a coordinated movement that baffled her every single time. That kind of balance on two legs was just plain unnatural. Ragdon's black eyes, smaller than any pony's, locked into hers as he exclaimed to her. "Someone is getting frustrated," he said in his broken accent. It was getting better, but the curious mix of the hard and soothing tones of his mother tongue were still there beneath it all.
Oh no, what possibly made you think of that?
She mocked. He gave no answers beyond narrowing his eyes a bit and quickly turning his head to watch as her manipulation of the field evaporated from the apple, turning it back to its natural red. "How many times have you tried this so far?" Twilight's young face frowned in defeat.
18.
Her horn lit up furiously once again.
Well, I'm getting it now, though. Just watch.
His hand whipped out and grabbed the apple before she could begin her ministrations. "I think not. You should stop."
I can't stop.
She protested. The very thought filled her with indignity. She wouldn't let a stupid apple stop her from completing her homework assignment. That's what students who do not wish to be mentored by the Princess Celestia any longer would do.
I have to finish my homework.
He threw the apple up in the air in a straight line. As she followed the motion, he caught it again and threw it up again, and again in a single hand juggling, each time giving the apple a new rotation that nevertheless didn't affect its straight orbit upwards. "You cast the spell 18 times so far. Tell me," he asked, "did you cast the same spell the same way you did it on this try as you did on the first one?"
Of course.
Ragdon kept launching the apple in the air, slowly increasing the height and speed of rotation. It was starting to actually wobble a little, she noticed. He had to make small adjustments to his hand position to catch it, before it landed on the table. "I see." He furrowed his eyebrows as he thought. "So, explain to me, why do you think you would get a different result than you did on your first one?" She was mystified by this. The answer was plain after all.
Because I would cast it better?
More throws. "Did you do exactly what the book told you to do the first time?"
Yes.
Another question that was self-evident. Answer: she always did as the book said. "Exactly as the book said? Did you follow every little detail?"
I cast the spell perfectly. I'm sure I did.
Watching the apple was kind of relaxing, actually. The spins were getting very intense, and really affecting the fruit's balance. It was fascinating in its own way. "I believe you," he assented. "Now, I want you to answer this next question carefully. I am a little dumb, and I might have missed something, so—"
You are not dumb,
she said, annoyed. "Well, I am a lot of things. This might be another one of them, though. Now, my question." She waited. He threw the apple one last time. He quickly brought his arm up and caught it in mid-descent with a satisfying thwomp sound as it made contact with his palm. He crouched himself down at her eye level. "If you cast the spell perfectly the first time, how would you cast it better on the next 17 attempts?" Her brain lurched. Slowly it started working again, though not before stopping her from doing a charade of a fish trying to feed.
just, better.
Okay, maybe she needed a few more seconds for her brain to go back to full power. He drew his torso back. "If it didn't work as it was supposed to with a perfect casting, then there was only one reason it didn't. You made a mistake."
I did not make a mistake,
she protested.
I cast the spell exactly as the book instructed, and the spell's composition in the book is perfectly correct. There is no mistake in the spell.
"You misunderstand, my little one," he placated her. "I didn't mean that the spell or the book had a mistake." She puffed her chest. "Darn right there is no mistake. Books do not make mistakes. I meant that it was you who made a different mistake altogether." So that's how a balloon feels when the knots untie.
What?
"You are trying to turn the apple yellow, right?"
Actually, I'm trying to compile the magic field that surrounds it into a selective reflective surface so that the naked eye sees a yellow coloration. The apple itself won't change at all,
she explained. "Tah!" He pointed at her with one of his fingers that was curled into a fist. "But when you do that, the apple turns orange instead."
This isn't funny, she complained. I have spent hours on the same spell, and I have nothing to show for it.
She frowned, rubbing the phrase with the hoof. The repeated failures and frustrations were getting to her. She could feel her eyes dampen and fought back the urge to cry. Ragdon's face turned worried and he quickly hurried off his seat. He placed himself next to her and started stroking her mane with one hand, the other lightly scratching her back at that place, right between her shoulder blades, and she could never really get on her own. I'm sorry, little one. I didn't mean to make fun of you by laughing. I just meant that I think I know what went wrong.
You do?
This made zero sense. Ragdon had absolutely no magic in him. He couldn't manipulate the magical fields in any way, shape, or form. Best he could do was disrupt it with his touch. He had no idea how it felt to have magic flow through you, or the sensitive pressure it was shaped under. All he had was what he had garnered from her studies as he escorted her around, mainly in magical theories. It was another one of his tricks to helping her, actually, that enabled him to know as much as he did without having a sense for magic. Every time she happened upon a subject that gave her trouble, he would have her give him a lecture about it. She liked that one. It made her feel like she believed Princess Celestia did when she taught her. It was a type of make-believe game that worked wonders for her understanding of the subject she would struggle with. Attempting to explain a magical theory, or anything else, say history, to Ragdon would quickly either reveal her own holes in her knowledge, or even more astonishing, facades of the facts that she would connect with each other and shine through in a sudden burst of understanding. Was it any wonder, then, how infuriating it was that he often found answers to magic problems while unable to make use of it? Yes, I do, little one. He hugged her close to his warm body. And guess what? I got the answer for you all packed in your favorite form.
What do you mean?
She asked from her snuggly position. Ragdon didn't answer her words. Instead, he reached for a book she hadn't noticed on the table before her and brought it in front of her so she could read the title. Basic Painting Techniques and Color Theory by Drybrush. She felt like screaming. She couldn't believe how simple it was all once she read about color mixing. It was so stupidly simple and terrifyingly brilliant how the spell worked once she had more proper context that she could hardly hold her voice in. Too bad she was in a library. Making some loud noise would be so satisfying right now. She looked next to her at Ragdon as he skimmed through the book about the old Caravan Trade Guild. What did he do to express his own frustration? Ah, right. She gritted her teeth and growled like he often did. Much better. Ragdon put his book down. He picked up the yellow apple and held it up proudly, its real coloration returning with his touch, fizzling the spell off of it. See? I knew you would get it in the end. You always do. Plus, all that practice helped you cast the spell almost instantaneously.
For simple objects, sure,
She groaned.
I can't believe I didn't see the problem before. I cast the exact same spell on a white page and it worked. It was so obvious.
Everything is in... He faltered. Twilight, is there a word for when you look back at something you did and see the wrongs after the fact? The dictionary in her mind flipped over a few pages.
The word is hindsight.
He pronounced the word a few times to himself. Everything is obvious in hindsight? She nodded at his questioning look. Got it now? That's important.
How did you figure it out anyway?
She asked curiously.
I don't remember anything like that in my lessons.
He grinned. Ah, I got an edge on you on that because of my kind's education. Twilight stopped reading what was in front of her and instead paid extra attention to Ragdon's words. If she was right, he was going to let slip a few rare words about his past life. It's actually early in our physics education where we learn about how light is actually made out of, He made a waving motion with his hands hesitantly. Wavelengths. I do not know the correct word. Each wave a certain color. So when you look at the apple, you just see the light that reflects on it, which has had some of its waves absorbed by the apple, so instead... She followed the hesitant explanation and completed the thought.
So instead of seeing white, I see apple as red.
He nodded.
So I see a white page as white because...
Because the surfaces reflect light without absorbing waves. Understanding dawned.
So it really works like color mixing. When I cast a spell, I added yellow to the surface that had no coloration, so it became yellow. It didn't work on the apple because it was mixing red and yellow, and it turned orange. But when I just took the red out...
Yeah, that's about right. Though, I guess the spell does a lot of translation between how you define color and what the light waves really are. He seemed to be pondering on that. All of this sounded extremely interesting to her, and she bet Princess Celestia would think the same too.
The way this spell is made, I think it was put together by trial and error to figure out the color changes. You should share all that you can remember about light with the princess. Knowing how light works is safe enough, isn't it?
She tried to entice him. Oh, stars, it would be great to know more about his kind's knowledge of physics. Ragdon alternated between looking at her and the apple in his hand.
He is thinking about it. Come on, come on, come on. Say yes, say yes, say yes.
It seems harmless enough, I guess, but then make the right spell and you could use light to cut through steel as if it was mist. She did not just hear that. There is absolutely no way you can do that. Can you? Then again, he continued smirking teasingly at her. Could use the same principles to see the state of building blocks of creation and measure them. She was thirsty. When was the last time she drank anything? Her mouth felt as dry as the Badlands.
You can do that?
She whispered she was being pranked. She had to be. No, he admitted. Ha! She didn't fall for it. Twilight still felt oddly disappointed, though.
To be able to do that...
Her thoughts were interrupted when he continued. I don't know the exact science needed behind building those kind of devices, but with magic and knowing what you can achieve, I guess you guys could make some pretty good imitations for our stuff.
See the building blocks of creation and measure them.
Of course his kind didn't have magic. If they did, it would be unfair to the rest of the world. From the precious tidbits Twilight could get from Ragdon, his unnamed kind were on their way of becoming gods. He breathed in deeply and turned back to her. I'll write some stuff down and get it to Celestia, I guess, along with my notes on biology. When I am done with them. Now homework. What's next? Biology. She asked about it on previous attempts, told her that once he changed the subject away from his kind or himself, he would clam up on any following questions. Instead, she turned over to the page where 3 of the practical exercise section. Then she quickly flipped through a few of the next.
I'm going to need a multicolored object for most of the next exercises. I have to manipulate the spell so I can change colors selectively in various numbers and combinations.
Ragdon scanned around. I'll go find something. Wait here for me. I'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Okay, Dad,
she sang. Ragdon paused on his way out and flashed a wide smile at her, showing off his sharper cutting teeth. She blushed as he turned around to the shelves. She didn't really mean to call him that. It just popped out every once in a while. She knew he wasn't her dad. Her real dad lived just outside Canterlot. Ragdon himself escorted her to her parents' home weekly. At least, Ragdon didn't mind, nor did her dad when Ragdon told him about her increasing habit to do so. She had overheard them without them knowing about it. Ragdon was timid about it, almost ashamed actually. It was very jarring because he wouldn't hesitate to stand up even against Princess Celestia and make a snarky comment about her size. Seeing him fidgeting and worry across her relatively tiny father was one of the weirdest sights of her young life. Her father had picked up on it very fast, however, and reassured him. A father's main job is to protect his foal. The way I see it, you are there every day, all day, doing my job. I think you earn the right for her to call you dad every once in a while. Just understand, we wouldn't mind seeing her a little bit more often, eh? It cut off some time from her studies, but Ragdon made a point to bring her parents every chance he got from a long enough visit, or even sleepover. It had made her family much happier, and even with the increased contact she had with her parents again, the slip of the tongue increased in volume. Worse, she was pretty sure she called Princess Celestia Mom before she fell asleep last night. She needed to take those thoughts out of her head. She picked up the book Ragdon brought her and turned to the color theory section again. She gave off another growl for good measure. That felt really good. Aggressive and challenging.
Come at me, laws of magic and science. You are no match for my brains.
She spent the next minute revising the chapter, taking care to growl at every paragraph.
Shameful.
Twilight dropped the book as she jumped her way up towards the ceiling. She could feel her heart thumping a fast beat as it was practicing for a new career as a drum soloist. Shaken, she looked behind her seat to see an old unicorn mare looking down at her. The steering mare's mane was a deep pink with a few lighter and gray hairs peppering through while her coat was a pale yellow. Twilight tried to get a glimpse of her cutie mark, but the unicorn was dressed in a long white coat that covered it. Her demeanor didn't instill a lot of hope in the young student that this would be a happy meeting, but she opted to remain courteous as well she had been taught.
Excuse me, can I help you?
She asked as politely as she could.
Look at you.
The unnamed mare with contempt dripping from every syllable.
Not only do you bear with that thing's presence, you even adopt its crude mannerisms.
Twilight tried to rebuke her.
His name is Ragdon, and is my friend, and... A name?
The mare exploded, disgust in her face.
That monster is not fit to have the same dignity that is afforded to a pet, and you...
Twilight had to cross her eyes to keep the offending hoof in her sinuses placed not a centimeter away from her muzzle.
You call it a friend? I knew there were even unicorns who could fall so low, but to see the princess's own student do so... Are you starved for attention, you cling to a thing like that? Imitate it so it will grunt its approval to you?
Twilight realized what this was all about. The offended mare was either a noble or part of their supporters. And one of the few things that almost every pony of Cadillac nobility would agree with was their utter disapproval of someone not of their ranks enjoying any kind of recognition from the princess. Twilight herself was often coveted target for their ire over the past 2 years. Every move or word of hers would be misconstrued as a fault or insult towards them or the princess at every opportunity. There were only 2 things shielding her from almost all of their attempts to hurt her in any way they could conceive. The first one was Princess Celestia herself, with only the most conceited ponies even entertaining the thought to attempt anything near where Celestia could witness it. The second was Ragdon, kept her away from their attention by simple virtue of being a much more hated target for their anger. What they saw as a beast had been offered quarters in the palace, and had the attention of the Princess of the Sun seemingly on demand, joining her almost daily in her public and private activities. They harbored nothing but hate and contempt for him, and Ragdon knew it. Of course, this being Ragdon, instead of the slightest attempt to mollify them, had decided to ante up on his own ways. But right now, he wasn't here, and this mare was determined to bring Twilight as low as she could while she was still vulnerable. Knowing what the pale unicorn was trying to do wasn't offering her any ways to protect herself, however. Twilight could only stammer and tear up as the noble pony twisted every trembling word that she managed to speak through the oncoming tears to plunge her daggers deeper into her.
I am not wasting Celestia's time.
Twilight struggled to pull the syllables out of her chest. Her accuser's eyes were wide, filled with anger and malice.
You dare evoke the princess's name without her proper title? You conceited, arrogant fool. You will be cast out of Canterlot soon. Mark my words.
Twilight's back was forced against the table, the mare's face only inches away from her, her mouth throwing spit on her with every sentence she roared at her.
Once I notify the monarch of her students,
she said with derision,
remarks you'll be lucky if she just sends you packing back to your worthless parents.
Twilight didn't believe her. Princess Celestia would believe her over this mare, but a part of her little filly, a part of her growing in size, had filled with fear, and doubt was shouting.
What if she was right?
Twilight could do nothing to stop herself from crying while insults and condemnations were piled on her.
Stop. Please, stop,
she begged. The pink-haired demon smiled wickedly at her and made a show of looking around.
I hope you've enjoyed your time at this library, you insolent riffraff, because you are not seeing it again once you walk out of here.
Her triumphant smile was quick to run and hide, however, when an appendage unique in the lands of Equestria landed on her right shoulder, and its unbelievably strong fingers dug into her coat. She's going to walk out of here all right. And do you know why? Because I don't want her to see why you won't be able to. Ragdon was crouched low enough to bring his mouth next to the unicorn's ear, with his other hand wrapped around her horn, effectively blocking her from casting any spell with his disruptive abilities towards magic fields. His face was expressionless, but Twilight could see a pure hate bleeding out of his eyes and voice.
Ragdon, don't do...
She tried to stop him from doing anything to make things worse for himself, but he wasn't going to let her. He whipped his attention towards her, taking in the horrible sight she was sure in. Her face must have been covered in snot and her coat matted down with tears. His pupils shrunk, and the terrified mare inhaled sharply as his fingers tightened their hold. He lost his frightening visage and some warmth slipped into his voice when he addressed her. Twilight, I want you to go outside and get the guards there to escort you to Celestia. I am going to be busy here for a bit of exchanging words with my new friend. The casual way he talked about the princess gave the mayor some courage enough to indignation to speak up.
How dare you talk about our princess like that, you vile beast?
That turned out to be a mistake as she once again became Ragdon's sole focus. As he responded to her post-haste by pulling her up by her horn, up on her back legs, only to bring her head back down on the table with unrelenting force. Blood spurting from her broken muzzle and a splash around her head like a painted halo. Go, now, Twilight, he ordered. She didn't hesitate. She didn't want to see this. She ran towards the royal library doors, the mayor's whimpering echoes behind her along with Ragdon's chuckles. She could do as she said. She would get the guards outside, but not to bring her to Celestia. That mayor was horrible, but she didn't deserve to be left alone with Ragdon when he was like that. She could tell the two guards outside to stall him long enough to get her princess here. The princess would be able to stop him. Almost an hour later, Twilight was cowering deep in a pile of cushions in Celestia's bedroom. She had used the luxurious bathroom to clean her up and tried to rest as she had been told, but sleep escaped her while doubts and fears of her were buzzing inside her mind. As soon as she burst into the huge throne room where Celestia was holding her sun court, she quickly shouted out to the princess as loud as she could over the bustling of the crowd.
Ragdon, a mare, he's going to kill her!
That was all she was able to breathe out in her exhaustion, but Princess Celestia understood all too well. She paused long enough to give directions to her aides to cancel the rest of court, and then teleported to Twilight's side. Wrapped one ring around her with another explosion of magic, brought them both to her quarters.
Where is he, Twilight?
Celestia asked her calmly.
At the library, the reading section near the entrance. Princess, he...
Celestia shushed her with a wing and nuzzled her softly.
It's all right, Twilight. Wait here and rest. I'll take care of it.
And then she was gone in another teleport. She hadn't heard anything yet from either of them. The absence of news and her fears were filling her up with dread. She wouldn't have told Celestia that Ragdon was going to kill that pony. Oh, he would hurt her enough, but not outright murder her. He didn't do that. Sometimes she wondered if it was because he didn't want to kill, or because he wanted them hurting more. She removed the disturbing question from her mind and examined the white-tiled floor of the bedroom, in an attempt to divert her musings. The white tiles were large, but smaller sections had been cut from them to make the room for the flowing gold metal that formed Celestia's cutie mark. The same relief was a mirrored identical right on top of it at the ceiling. Now that she thought about it, Celestia's cutie mark was all over her rooms. Her doors had the same design, the bed's wooden headrest, and the white curtains had a light gold stitching when she suspected would form the same design when they were pulled closed. Did Celestia ask for everything to be decorated like that, or was some designer to do it and impress her? Was it because of what the princess called poor phrasings that made everyone think she wanted her cutie mark plastered everywhere in sight? Her own phrasing might be what pushed Princess Celestia to be harsher than she should. What if she really hurt Ragdon in her belief that she was stopping him from murdering one of her subjects? It would be her fault, hers, because she overstated his intentions. And even if she didn't hurt Ragdon, she did just betray him, didn't she? She sicked 2 guards on him, plus a couple of others who were patrolling nearby, and sent the princess against him. And the reason she did that? Because she couldn't defend herself from a verbal assault from an unknown mare. He rushed to her aid, and she tattled on him immediately. Twilight closed her eyes, and once again tried to get some sleep. She felt exhausted, and the pillows were so amazingly soft and warm. saturated with Mom's soft scent. She was nudged awake by an unknown amount of time later. The sun no longer shined through the windows, so that meant she had slept the day away at least. Next to her, sitting on the bed, was Ragdon, smiling sadly at her. At the soft white light coming from the scones next to the bed, she could easily see the swelling around one of his eyes, and the bruises covering half his face. Questions about what happened were forming at an astounding speed, but were all pushed aside so she could jump on him and hug him as hard as she could. Hey, little one, he whispered, his voice as soothing as always when she was scared or alarmed. Are you feeling better?
I'm fine,
Twilight answered and kept busy for a while, just holding on to him and nuzzling the side of his face that wasn't hurt.
What happened to you?
His bruises were worrying her. She relaxed her hold on him, realizing that if he was hurt that bad on his face, his body must have been as bad. She just couldn't see it with the clothes he wore.
How did you get hurt? Did Celestia...
No, didn't have to kick my face in, he interrupted her, tightening his own hold on her. When Celestia popped in and she told me to drop her, so I did. From the tittering way he said that, she can compose a scenario of how that drop occurred.
And the bruises?
Well, the guards weren't going to just kindly ask me to back off, you know? I'm impressed, though. I didn't expect an Earth Pony to be able to do that kind of jump for an air kick. He gently rubbed his swollen eye.
Did you hurt them?
The guards were sent to stop him because of her. She didn't like the thought of any of them having to be hospitalized. I just threw them around on each other and they tapped me a few times while one of them was trying to drag the bitch out of reach. He frowned, glancing to the closed bedroom doors. Don't tell Celestia I swore in front of you, okay? It just slipped out. She giggled. At least no pony was really hurt.
I'm sorry I tattled on you.
She apologized, her mood turning morose fast again.
I shouldn't have done that.
He unwrapped his arms from her, grabbed her, and deposited her on his side, on top of a white pillow. This is what you're worrying about, really? She nodded. He huffed and covered his face with his hands. He stayed like that for a few seconds before removing them and addressing her again. Little one, you did the right thing. She didn't say anything, just waited, her questions written on her face. He got up from the bed and kneeled in front of her, putting his hands on the same level. Listen, what I did, what I was going to do, was wrong.
But you were just defending me from her.
I was, my little one. That was the right thing to do. But you know what I was going to do to her, right? That I was going to hurt her really, really bad. He waited for her to nod. I am not a good person, Twilight. No, don't try to say anything. I am good to you and a few others, but that doesn't mean a lot to everyone else, now does it? I would overdo it, and she would have ended up in a hospital, or worse. Not because I needed to do so to protect you, but because I would enjoy hurting her too much to stop.
I don't get it. You know you shouldn't do things this way. Why don't you just stop yourself?
He shrugged. I can't. I don't want to. I realize I take it too far only in hindsight. He chuckled and brushed her cheek with the back of his hand when it failed to get the same reaction out of her. Oh, come on. Not even a little smile for remembering a tough new word. She afforded him a small, fleeting smile, very small, barely curved to the corners of her mouth. Ragdon's face lit up like the sun that even little. Was it any wonder how she loved him, and when he would respond like this to her every tiny move?
So, I did the right thing?
She asked desperately. He patted her head. I heard what she called me, little one. Many ponies here call me monster too, and sometimes I kind of become one. I don't seem to mind that, however, do I?
No,
she agreed. Do you know why I do not care? She shook her head. Because I know that if I become a monster, you and Celestia will do the right thing and be there to stop me. There we go. The first chapter of the Lunar Guardsman. My voice was a little rough on this one because I just finished recording a chapter of the Centurion project, but I hope it was still good nonetheless. And a special thank you to the author for giving me their blessing. I really do appreciate it. Enough of that though. This has been Firehearth. Have a wonderful day.